This week I went to see The Fabelmans, and anybody who knows me well won't be surprised to hear me say this, but I think it is a wonderful film. I've been studying Steven Spielberg's life and career for most of my own life, so I already was sort of familiar with a lot of the stuff that happens in the film, although there were some stuff that made me think, did that really happen, or is that fictionalized? Which is to say, the film itself is a work of fiction, but a lot of it is based on true events that really happened in his life. So I was wondering how much of it was made up and how much of it was actually directly influenced by things that really happened to him. For instance, my favorite subplot, and by the way, there will be spoilers in this review, so if you don't want spoilers, listen no further. Just go see the film, take my word for it. It's pretty great. My favorite subplot in the film, for instance, was when his alter ego, who's named Sammy in the film, is dating this girl in high school who is a total Jesus freak. Never in a million years did I ever expect to hear the words "Jesus is sexy" in a Spielberg movie. I'm going to assume that Tony Kushner contributed that line of dialogue, but I don't know, maybe a girl really said that to Spielberg. But just this image of the girl on the bed with Sammy making up and him looking up at this bloody crucifix on the wall, staring down at him, I just could not stop laughing. Oh my God. Also, David Lynch's cameo is epic. I was delighted to finally see him and Spielberg working together in a film. I remember in February earlier this year when it was announced that Lynch had been cast in the movie, and then the rumor immediately started on Twitter that he was going to play John Ford in the film. And I was like, who started that rumor? I really hope it's true, but I was skeptical for a little while, and I am wondering who even started that word-of-mouth chain. It was almost one of those things that seemed too good to be true, honestly. Because, I'm going to go on some tangents in this review, by the way. It's not just going to be a review of the movie, because I had a million thoughts in my head watching it. But let's just focus for right now on David Lynch playing John Ford in a Steven Spielberg movie. The reason why this was meaningful to me, well, actually, there were many reasons why it was meaningful to me. One is because John Ford, I'm not a huge John Ford fan, but I do admire some of his films very much, like The Man Who Sought Liberty Valance. I like The Searchers, even though I've got some criticisms of it. How Green Was My Valley is pretty good. The Quiet Man is pretty good. But then, you remember Quentin Tarantino was in 2012 saying how he hated John Ford and thought his movies were racist and against Native Americans, and because he played a Klansman at Birth of a Nation. Such bullshit, in my opinion, that Tarantino spews sometimes. But somebody like him can get away with a statement like that. Just a total Teflon director like Tarantino can just call John Ford a racist and nobody cares. But then, it takes Spielberg and David Lynch and I don't even know if David Lynch himself is a fan of John Ford. I mean, when our graduating class talked to him, Lynch was pretty much admitting to us that he's not a movie buff. People always try to compare Lynch to Luis Buñuel, and he'll be like, I haven't seen any of his movies. I think he's only seen Un Chien Andalou. But when you finally see Lynch's scene in The Fabelmans, the resemblance is uncanny. They made him look almost exactly like John Ford with the costume, and the voice, of course, is not quite the same, but it's sort of the same. And just when you hear Spielberg tell that story himself in videos on YouTube about Ford's face full of lipstick is like that. Even that story just makes him burst out laughing. And then actually seeing Lynch come through the room, I was laughing so much. And then before Lynch appears and you're hearing the music from The Searchers, I mean, that was really a great emotional moment. And then, when Ford gives that kind of advice about how the horizon should only be on the top of the frame or the bottom in the frame, but putting it in the middle is boring as shit. I wish that I had paid stricter attention to stuff like that when I was directing my own student films in film school, because visually, I think we all have a lot to learn when we're making movies, and what John Ford said is so right about the horizon, and where it's placed. So it was surreal to actually finally see that captured in the movie. And then, of course, the final shot where Spielberg proves Ford's point. You think it's going to end right there in the middle, and then the camera's like, oops, wait a minute, and then goes to where the horizon, I can't remember the horizon's ultimately on the bottom or the top. But, those are my personal favorite parts of the movie. But The Fabelmans also works as a very compelling drama, a family drama. And I did relate to a lot of it. I don't want to really get into the personal reasons why, but like, for instance, the scene when I know a little bit about Spielberg's issues with his parents growing up in their divorce and how that traumatized him and his sisters. But I was expecting the film to go a lot harder on his father Arnold, who Paul Dano plays a fictionalized portrait of Arnold Spielberg in the film. And Spielberg has been very open about how he had issues with his dad, in the 60s and the 70s and I guess the 80s, and they didn't really reconcile until the 90s. And Spielberg would usually blame his dad for his parents' divorce and seemed a little defensive about his mother, even though some people say she was mad. As for his mother, Leah, who Michelle Williams plays in the film, I got to meet Leah a number of times in 2015 and 2016 when I first moved to LA. I was living in West Hollywood, and I would walk to Leah's kosher restaurant, the Milky Way in Beverly Hills, a lot. And the first time I went to the Milky Way, I was having dinner there, and by then Leah was in her mid-90s, and then she and her caretaker, when they see me at the table, they come over to meet me, and I'm so excited to finally meet Leah Spielberg, and I'm telling her that I've heard about her restaurant, having read books about her son for years. And then she said to me, His Honor was here for lunch today, and he forgot to leave a tip. And then over the ensuing months, I would take various family and friends to the Milky Way to meet Leah as well. And then in March of 2016, I went there for lunch to the Milky Way, and I went into the hallway to use the bathroom, and then in the hallway, there's like all the Spielberg posters, and then one poster of the movie Big, because his sister Anne wrote the screenplay for Big. I got to meet Anne once too. She was very happy to, when I told her that I was a big fan of Big. And then I walked out of the hallway, and there's Spielberg right there, like within arm's length of me, right there at a table talking to his mother. I was like trembling. I was like, oh my God. Like I quietly walked back to my table. The manager, Peter, comes over to my table, and I say, Peter, is it okay if I go talk to him, or does he not like that? And Peter's like, no, he only comes here. That's frowned upon. He comes here to see his mother. So I kept a respectful distance. But then I think it may have been the same month, or maybe just in the spring or in the summer, I went back there and I saw Spielberg there having lunch with, I'm pretty sure the other two gentlemen dining with him that day were Richard Donner and Terry Semel, or at least that's what they looked like. But he was there with Leah again, and he slowly danced with her in the middle of the restaurant. Everybody's going on. So that's my little tangent about Leah Spielberg. I did get to meet her. I never got to meet Arnold, his father. I would have liked to, but But what's ironic about it is Leah would never talk to the press about her son, but Arnold was always fine, I guess, doing interviews about his son. And if you ever see the HBO documentary that Susan Lacey did, Arnold on camera is admitting that those portrayals of distant fathers in movies like Close Encounters, Third Kind, and that these kind of portrayals of troubled fathers kind of hurt him, but he kept quiet about it. And so that's why when I saw this movie, I was expecting the movie to go a little harder on Spielberg's dad. But actually, it's just as hard, if not more, on his mother. And that scene where he is seething at her because he knows she's falling in love with his dad's best friend. And then he just screams at her and then she says, "Why are you being such a little shit to me? And I'm your mother." And he screams at her, "I wish you were." And then he turns around and she goes to hit him and accidentally strikes his back. And then she's crying and feeling bad. Gosh, that scene was so painful to watch. Maybe I shouldn't say nobody, but few directors do family drama as harrowing as Spielberg can do it. Mike Leigh is another director who does that sort of thing very well. Now, although obviously Mike Leigh goes in a much more R-rated direction when he portrays issues in families. Jonathan Demme also had a talent for that, I think. The reason why it works so well when Spielberg does it, I'm thinking in Close Encounters, that deleted scene of Roy cowering in the shower and his wife screaming at him, his children screaming at him. I get all that stuff. And again, I relate to it a little bit. I understand what it's like for families to be in those kind of tense situations where selfish desires drive everybody apart. I got teary-eyed a couple of times in the film. The first is when the parents announce that they're getting a divorce and how all the children just can't handle it. And then there's a scene shortly after that when Sammy is trying to edit, I guess, his beach blanket movie, and one of his sisters comes in, and she's tearful about it and doesn't understand why he's so focused on his movie when his family is right there suffering. And then he asks her to watch the movie with him. That scene kind of made me teary-eyed too. I loved Judd Hirsch. Thought he was so great in that one scene of his family and art. It'll tear you into. Again, I know what the fuck he's talking about. It's very hard when you have this love of movies, but you also know that when your family supports you, as Spielberg's family, for the most part, did support his ambitions, even if his dad kind of thought it may... Even though Arnold wanted Steven to be an electrical engineer, Arnold still helped Steven make his Boy Scout films and stuff. So even though Spielberg didn't get as much support as he may have liked for his filmmaking ambitions, he still got support. And I myself, I have to say, have had support from my family, and this movie made me grateful for that. Because the reality is that pledging your whole life to this particular art form is a motherfucker. It crushes you. The years go by and you feel yourself getting older. Spielberg got a little lucky because in his early 20s, he was already directing Night Gallery and stuff. And so, he had some connections, Chuck Silver, Sid Sheinberg, and some people that knew his dad who knew somebody at Universal and that, and so, but still, that part of the film I connected to as well. Now, I won't say the film is perfect. In regards to the way the film portrays the way Spielberg was bullied, for instance, those scenes, they're so visceral. They make you hate those bullies. You wish Sammy would hit them back. But then I look at myself and I think every time a bully, bullied me in high school, I can't say I was really punched in the face, but I was at times physically pushed around by bullies. I wish I had hit them back. But I was always afraid of getting in trouble. So that part of the movie really struck a nerve for me. But there is one particular scene that I think was overwritten and maybe consolidated a little too much for the sake of keeping the film at a 2.5-hour length. And it's when Sammy finally shows his beach blanket bingo at the movie at the prom. And in the span of a whole evening, his girlfriend basically breaks up with him at the prom, and then the main head bully watches his movie and somehow is embarrassed that Sammy portrayed him in a flattering light, even though the guy has treated Sammy like shit. And then in the hallway, the bully feels embarrassed about it, and he and Sammy have this showdown, and then the other bully comes in, and then the one bully punches the other. I don't know. I did find that scene to be a little contrived. Again, I don't know how much of it is based on Spielberg's real interactions with these bullies. I'll have to go back, I guess, and read Joseph McBride's biography. But I just felt I didn't completely believe it. I had a hard time understanding. I mean, I get what Spielberg is trying. I get what Spielberg and Tony Kushner were trying to do with that scene, but I sort of feel like that was just Spielberg's own imaginary the kind of confrontation he wished he had had with the bullies. I just have a hard time believing that the bully would be that embarrassed that Sammy portrayed him in a heroic light. These bullies are such idiots in the movie that I somehow didn't believe that one of them would have the nuance to feel guilty about, being portrayed that way in Sammy's movie. It's not a bad scene. I appreciate the attempt, and it's obviously a very personal scene. I just think the rest of the movie is a little bit stronger. And on that note, I think I'm going to go on another tangent and say, here's the thing. I think that The Fabelmans is a great film. Clearly one of the best films of the year. It's probably going to be my number one pick of the year, because that's usually how I am about Spielberg's films. I always want him to win all the Oscars. I always want to say he made the best movie of this year and that year, etc. But if I'm being completely honest about what was the last Spielberg film that I thought was like an honest-to-God masterpiece, like one of the best movies I've ever seen, like a film that made me cry really hard, a film that changed me forever after I saw it, I think the last time Spielberg made a film like that, for me, I have to say it was War Horse, 2011. Unfortunately, nobody loved War Horse nearly as much as I did. I was sitting there crying when War Horse ended. My family was all snickering at me. They thought the movie was just okay. And then, of course, at the Oscars, it didn't win anything. Man, I cried so hard at the end of War Horse. Fuck everybody who hated War Horse. You do not get you do not appreciate the artistic brilliance of War Horse. If there's any movie of Spielberg's that I think John Ford would have appreciated, I think it would have been that one. And then after that, Spielberg still has continued to make a bunch of great, awesome films. Lincoln was a great film, and yet even with Lincoln, I think Spielberg and Daniel Day-Lewis should have made 2 Lincoln films, not just one. They barely even managed to convince Hollywood to finance 1 Lincoln movie, if you can believe it. But in my opinion, the dramatic possibilities of Abraham Lincoln's life are so much bigger than just 1 2.5-hour film. But again, for the film that Spielberg and Daniel Day-Lewis made, great fucking movie, right? Bridge of Spies. You could say the same thing about Bridge of Spies, sort of. Again, it's a great film, but maybe didn't quite change my life the way some of Spielberg's earlier masterpieces did. I really liked the BFG when I saw it, but I've never really had much of an urge to revisit it. One day I will, but I think I don't know that the BFG was a film Spielberg needed to make. I don't really think the material was good enough for him. The Post, I thought was great at the time that I saw it, but then when I revisited The Post, I thought it was a very good film, but I don't know if it was great. I think Ready Player One was great. I saw it 3 times in 3 theaters. But Ready Player One is not necessarily the kind of film that changes you after you watch it either. West Side Story remake, loved it. Again, great fucking movie. Spielberg finally got to make a musical. And now we have The Fabelmans, which is the most personal film that he's made in a long time. But I'm not one of those people who's going to be like, The Fabelmans is Spielberg's best movie since Lincoln. The Fabelmans is his best movie since, Munich or whatever. I think The Fabelmans is Spielberg's best film since West Side Story or Ready Player One. Spielberg's never stopped making great movies. That's why he's one of the greatest directors that we have. I think probably why he's my personal favorite director, because I can't think of another director who's made more masterpieces on his resume. I remember 2001 and 2005, AI, Minority Report, Munich, War of the Worlds, all just hard fucking masterpieces that changed my life growing up. To a lesser extent, Catch Me If You Can and The Terminal were very good too. But being a 90s kid, Spielberg's films impacted me very significantly at a young age. Jaws, E.T., Jurassic Park, Close Encounters, Indiana Jones. These are films that once you see them as a child, they're there in your head for life. Schindler's List is probably his greatest film. Saving Private Ryan is up there, certainly too. So the greedy part of me is hoping that, even though I hope Spielberg never retires, but the greedy part of me is hoping that he does come back with one last kind of earth-shattering, late career masterpiece, in the same way that Kurosawa could direct a film like Ron, for instance, in old age. Because I miss the days when being a Spielberg fan was considered cool. But then again, he doesn't really need to prove anything anymore. Like I said, he's got more masterpieces on his resume than most directors. Because Spielberg is not just a director anymore, he's also a husband and a father and a studio mogul. So he doesn't necessarily need to make the kind of passionate masterpieces anymore that change a person's life. Most directors make their best films in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. I think Spielberg was doing it well into his 60s. He may give us another one of those best movies ever made. I think that's just the thing. I don't know if The Fabelmans is necessarily one of the best movies ever made. I don't know that you could put it in Spielberg's top 10. But is that important? No, not really. A great film is a great film. With that being said, The Fabelmans still gets a strong thumbs up from me. Go see it.